So it's exactly 12:05, and I'd like to welcome everyone who's joined us for today's session. Today's session continues our talk on design thinking. Design thinking, as we said, has become prevalent, or it's become so important that um, whether you're a product owner, product manager, you're working within transformation, you need to start having that mindset of design thinking. And earlier on, we've talked about the 5 stages of design thinking. And today we'll focus on the first stage, empathize. Empathize with our users, empathize with those using the product, empathizing with our customer. And then there's define, then we'll produce prototypes, test, and then make sure that we can send that product to the customer. So it's empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So for today's session, it's all about empathize, empathize, empathize. The word sounds a bit condescending, or it sounds like as if you are trying to be, to take care of the person you are conducting the research for. But more importantly, we want to walk in the shoes of the customer. We want to understand their world, and we really want to make sure that we understand how they are impacted by the problem. So in the case of empathize, we want to help define the problem by walking in the shoes of the customer. So we want to understand their needs, get to know them, and design a solution which is critical and fit for purpose for them. So through a robust research and making sure that in a robust research engaging way, we are able to collect information from the user, refine the information, and then produce solutions that will help the user. There are many ways of carrying out this stage of empathizing, but the 2 key ways are looking at it from a quantitative and a qualitative approach. Quantitative and a qualitative approach. The first, quantitative, we want to gather data. So what data do we want to gather about our customers? What data do we want to gather about our users? Is there any history that we could look into and that would help us produce reports or produce, let's say, the insights about that particular customer? If we can do all of those, it helps us in getting to understand the customer. But this is from a quantitative point of view. So let's look at a retail shop who wants to understand their customers. They would like to understand the pattern of the customer visits. They would like to understand what the customer comes to buy. And they could use shop carts. They could also observe the buyer's pattern of buying particular products, and that can help the retail shop stock the goods that the customer needs. But the quantitative measurement is all about understanding the customer from a metric viewpoint. Is it important? Absolutely important. We can draw insights from the data once we analyze the data, and that can help us formulate better solutions for the customer. Now let's look at the second approach from a qualitative approach. The qualitative approach is trying to understand the needs of the customer and you understanding the feelings of that particular user as well. Qualitatively, we want to engage with the customer, but prior to engaging with the customer, we need to spend some time knowing who the customer is. So for most companies who are on the design thinking journey, they talk about personas. Why do they want to create a persona for a particular customer they want to understand? So there are so many customers they want to look into, but they want to focus on a particular customer. So they will create a persona for that particular customer and spend more time trying to understand the world of that particular customer. So personas are very helpful. We'll spend some time talking about personas, creating personas, the various steps that we need to go through in creating personas. But as a product owner, business analyst, consultants, we all need to create personas so that we can understand the user or the customer we are focusing on. So when you start gathering information, when you start gathering requirements, think about the user and create a persona for them. Later on, I'll talk about the steps for creating personas. And that might be a different session where we only focus on personas and take the step-by-step approach in producing a persona. So we want to go into the customer's world. Qualitatively, first, we want to gather some data. So we do some research. Yeah. What do we know about the customer? What patterns do we know about the customer? Is there anything that we can gather from what's existing within the business about the customer? So we can go and look around all the various reports, all the informations that have been gathered about the customer. So before we approach that particular persona, we've got some information about them. Have we done our research? Are we ready to speak to them? And there are other qualitative techniques that we can use, but before you can go and approach anyone, you need to do your research and know about them. Some of the qualitative techniques that we use after we've gathered our research are first interviews. I'm sure most of us here have done an interview. Have you all done an interview? Or have you been interviewed by someone who's gathering information? In many ways, before someone approaches us, they would have done some time, they would have spent some time thinking about the questions they want to ask us before coming into that interview session. So as someone going through the stages of gathering information, we want to spend some time writing out the questions about that particular persona, and or that particular user, and when we approach them, we want to ask them the right questions. So interviews help very well. Interviews will help, but we must be prepared for the interview session. Shadowing is another technique that we can use to gather information. Going into the user's world, shadowing the user, observing the user, seeing the user's world would enable us gather the necessary information we need to collect from that particular user. First, we could do an interview. An interview will give us a limited amount of information. But when we conduct shadowing, we are in the world of the user, sitting with the user, engaging with the user. And it's just like someone sitting behind me or someone just sitting by my side, observing the way I talk, and that could help them improve my settings or how I engage with people online. Sitting with the user is the best experience you can have, but not all of our users would give us that opportunity. But we could create opportunities for observing the users during the empathize stage. We can have long-term observation techniques like ethnographic study. Ethnographic study is spending a longer time with the user and trying to understand that user's world. We don't have the luxury of it, and we won't have all the time, a year or 6 months, to spend with one particular user to gather all the information from them so that can help us improve the solution we're working on. So if you tend to have the luxury of it, do use it. It's not easy to have that opportunity to spend so much months with a particular user. So you can shadow the user, you can carry out ethnographic study on that particular user. Whilst you doing that, you want to document everything you're collating from that particular user. So we need to keep in all the information we've collated from interviews, shadowing, and create a journal of the information we've created. All these stages would require us preparing and making sure that we've got the right questions to ask whilst we involve that particular user. There are some key things to look at whilst observing the user. You could observe their body language. And if you observe their body language and they are feeling uncomfortable throughout the process, there are techniques you could also apply to make such a person feel comfortable. I remember observing a team of customer service agents whilst improving their processes. The first time I went in there, I was dressed in shirt and tie, and most of them weren't dressed in shirt and tie. So it looked too formal to be there and to engage with them. So I thought about the whole process and said, if I'm going to engage this group again, should I go in shirt and tie? Would it help me engage better with them? I said, okay, that's not the best approach I have used this morning. So after lunch, I took my tie off and went back to the team. When I went back to the team, most of them laughed at me and they said, William, have you taken your tie off? I said, yeah. I was feeling so uncomfortable and I felt I was choking myself all morning. So I've taken my tie off. And for the rest of the day, the team became very relaxed. They had conversations with me. They talked me through the process. And I realized that initially when I came in the morning, there was nothing I had written. There was less information I could gather because they were following the process. But when I went back in the afternoon, no tie, I'd folded my sleeves, they were more relaxed and they talked to me and I could gather information from their environment. So when you are conducting or when you're using all these techniques, do remember to think about the user's environment, observe their body language, and be able to be there with them so that they can feel relaxed about the whole process. So we've been talking about Empathise, and we've talked about quantitative techniques, gathering data, analyzing the data, and drawing insights from the data. We've had conversations now about the qualitative techniques. And the qualitative techniques, we said before you start the qualitative techniques, let's get a persona of the user or the customer we want to engage. Secondly, let's do some research about them, find some history of information that exists about our users, and then we can go ahead and use such elicitation techniques like interviews, shadowing, ethnographic study, shadowing, ethnographic studies, and documenting their processes or customer journey mapping so we can understand the user's environment. All these techniques are also applied by analysts, product owners to gather information from their users. How different is this from design thinking? There's no big difference, but it's how the group uses it. Business analysts would have a shorter time with their users whilst going through these stages. Design thinkers will have more time with their users or customers to be able to gather such information and apply them. So whether you're an analyst, a design thinker, you still have the opportunity to use the same skill sets and engage the users to gather the necessary information. What I would like to talk about this afternoon before 12:30 will be interviews. And here we're looking at the techniques for empathy interviews in design thinking. Just reflecting on interviews. Why should we conduct interviews? Interviews are considered to be 1-on-1, not 1-to-2 or 1-to-3. Interviews are more 1-on-1 in the design thinking approach. You've identified your persona. You've gathered enough information about that persona, and you want to spend some time in their world gathering more information about them. So the first thing we want to do is, who are we interviewing? Is that person really important for us to gather all the information about? Do they matter to the entire process? And can we trust that when we interview such a person, we are going to get all the information we need? The most painful approach is wasting your time on the person that is not going to give you the information. I am not saying that people are not important, but what I am driving at is before you go into an interview, identify a stakeholder or a customer who is going to give you all the necessary information that you need. When we are going into such interviews as well, we should try and drop our assumptions and our judgments, our biases about the person we are going to interview. We should go in a research mind so that we can collect all the necessary information from that particular user. So interviews are very important. They can give us all the information once we get the right person. It enables us to focus on the emotional, the subconscious aspects of that particular user. It allows us to gain insights on that user and how they behave in a given environment. And they also help us to engage more with that particular user and set them at ease throughout the process. Usually, you want to conduct interviews as the very first stage during your design thinking process. So you have to go through the process of selecting your users, and you can ask some key questions. How many people do I want to interview? How do I recruit them? How do I know they are the target person I can get all the information from? And if I recruit them, how do I engage with them throughout the whole process? One thing you have, there are some few things you have to do. You have to immerse yourself in the whole process and ask yourself, how will my interviewer feel about the situation if I ask them questions and I engage with them? Whilst you are asking them questions, you also have to observe them and continuously engage with them. So we've done the initial stages of trying to know our user, our customer. Now let's go into the interview process. The key things that constitute an interview is the questions we ask during the interview. So before we go into our first interview, we need to spend some time researching, asking ourselves some key questions that would enable us engage with the user. If you don't have the questions, just forget about going into the interviews. So spend some time, create a set of questions, and make the questions right for the person you are asking. I once had a colleague going to interview a senior director, and the questions they were asking were operational activities. That's asking the right questions, but to the wrong person. But if you're going to interview a senior director, ask them the right questions, where you're asking questions on strategy and management that will help the person give you the right answers. So remember whom you are interviewing and ask the right questions. During the interview, create a comfortable environment so that that person can come in. What are the things you could do to create that comfortable environment? Make sure the place is ready and the person coming in does not realize that there are other people in that environment and what they say might be heard or can be heard by other people. Introduce yourself, describe why you are interviewing that person, and have a list of questions to ask that person. More importantly, you should have open-ended questions. Open-ended questions can help you engage with that person. From what we do here from many literature is ask open-ended questions. Yes, tell me why, how, what. All of those can be good open-ended questions, but there are sometimes where you also have to ask closed questions to make sure that what you've asked the person is the right thing they are saying, or just to confirm what you've asked that person. So there's an opportunity to ask open-ended questions, and there's an opportunity to ask closed-ended questions to confirm the key things you are asking. And sometimes you have to ask neutral questions so it doesn't look like you have your skin in the game, but to encourage the other person to engage with you. Today, we've covered interviews, but there's more to interviews. I would say preparing for the interview, being involved in the interview, and looking at the outcome of the interview and how you engage with the person after the interview are so important in the entire process. And I've got a question. Please, what if the senior director is also the user of the key stakeholders to answer the operational questions? Definitely, then you've got the right person to talk to. They can do both and provide you all the necessary information. We've got 5 minutes to end, and I know I've been rambling and rambling on. Have you got any questions to ask about what we've just covered on Empathise as part of the first stage of the design thinking process? Anyone got questions to ask about Empathise, the first stage of the design thinking process? We'll be taking all the stages, we'll be discussing them. There's more information to be gathered on such areas, but do remember, in the design thinking process, your first stage is Empathise, getting to know your users. It's walking in the shoes of your users. You can't avoid it. You need to be with the users throughout the process. And it's become a very important process in the design thinking approach. Empathise, get to know your users, gather quantitative data, gather qualitative data, refine the data, and continuously improve on that data. Any questions so far on what we've covered on Empathise?
William, I have a question.
Go for it.
First of all, thank you so much. I love your sessions, absolutely productive.
Thank you.
The question that I have is, what happens if, sorry, you did talk about creating a persona, and I know that's not part of this session, but I'm actually at the phase of my project where I will need that information. Can you give us like a quick 60-second summation of what's involved in creating a persona, please? Thank you.
Okay, I can send a link after this session as well about the persona. So we're trying to gather as much information about that particular person or user. And in creating personas, we should spend some time understanding what the demography of the user, asking questions that can help us personally know the person or the user we want to engage. We can also ask questions about their professional career, their challenges, what drives them, what their goals are. And it's more like a stakeholder, getting to know your stakeholder process. And if you can spend some time understanding whom that person is, what their challenges are, why you want to know more about them, what about the entire process gets them involved in your organization, or what do they do as part of the process that you want to gather some information about. And you don't have to do it alone. You can work with your colleagues to get some information about that particular persona. Spending some time to understand the user would help you going forward so that you can answer and ask the right questions about that particular user. I've got some information as well. Let me see. Let me just draw on some info on personas. So you can describe their demographics. Are they married? Have they got an income? Where do they live? How old are they? Do they have children? What's their educational background? You can check on their hobbies, what their challenges are, what their barriers are, what their goals are, and what are their key drivers. Those are the key things you want to draw so that you can understand the person whom you are writing about. So personas is understanding the person or the customer involved in the process. Any other questions? Okay, So it's now 12:30, and thank you all for joining today's sessions. Please do give me your feedbacks. And the next session as well will be on Empathise. I found it so interesting sitting back, reflecting on Empathise, and I've seen that there's so much we need to know about Empathise. So the next session will be on Empathise again before we move to the define, ideate, prototype, and test. Thank you all, and let's have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. How do we give you feedback, please?
Do type the feedback and let's send it as well on, is it WhatsApp?
Okay.
Feel free, feel free to send all your feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hello.